screening of Welcome to Shelbyville it's the result of a prodigious collaborative effort between a wide variety of media, cultural, and immigrant organizations. I want to take a moment to identify everyone involved, not merely to acknowledge their contribution to making the screening possible, which I feel I need to do, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to emphasize the potential significance of this as a model for our efforts to generate a better environment for immigrant integration and civic participation in New Jersey. If you look at the front side of your program on the bottom, and for those of you who don't have a program, there are plenty over here under the exit sign. But if you take a quick look at the front side of your program, you will see 11 logos. Shelbyville, the film, is a co-production of 4 of those logos. A 5th logo is responsible for generating community screenings of the film around the country as catalysts for implementing engagement campaigns and coalition building around the film. The 6th logo, filmmaker Kim Snyder's Because Foundation, drives social change through the fusion of documentary filmmaking and related strategic programs that promote broad-based movements for social change. It's a fabulous foundation, and I urge you to check it out online. Finally, these collaborations mark Shelbyville as a film with a purpose. To generate civic dialogue and community building around immigrant integration in the United States. And it's particularly fortuitous that particular partners who are presenting this screening tonight have come together around this film. The Newark Museum is one of the great legacy cultural institutions of the city. The Star-Ledger is the most significant media source in the state. And the programs on immigration and democracy in New Brunswick and the Center for Migration and the local city here in Newark are 2 Rutgers-based organizations that work on immigration and immigrant integration as their primary focus. We're really pleased to present. Since we're not preventing anything here tonight, we hope. To present Welcome to Shelbyville as the inaugural event in a new series that this particular group of collaborators has put together that will focus on what we're calling the newest New Jerseyans. We invite you all to join us on May 11th for the second event, which is a forum on the implications of the 2010 census and New Jersey's changing demographic. And the details about this particular event are on your program, and if you need information to register for that, that is also on your program. A couple of quick logistics before we begin. Directly following the screening, there will be a brief panel discussion of the film, followed by an opportunity for you all to ask questions and comment on the film. We'd also be most grateful, and this is where there's no such thing as a free lunch or a free reception comes in. We would be most grateful if you would take a moment before you leave to fill out the questionnaire we have circulated. That's the rather loud orange piece of paper that many of you are holding right now. I hate filling out questionnaires. I feel your pain. I flinch. I get angry. People shouldn't make me right. However, if the collaborations that have brought this particular film here and that have brought this particular film into being are to lead to something more than the events tonight, the answers on this questionnaire will actually help us to make that happen. So we really encourage you. And as I look around the room, I see so many community advocates, activists, service providers. Please give us your feedback. We're really, really interested in trying to provide the kind of public programming, civic dialogue that leads to social change, and particularly better conditions and a better environment for immigrants in the state of New Jersey. So I feel your pain. Please fill it out. All I have to say beyond this is that, again, as I look around the room, I was looking at Anastasia Mann from the program on immigration and democracy, Bob Provost from the Star-Ledger, Mark Alvin, who you just met. We're so gratified by the number of people who have come to be here tonight, and we hope that as the inaugural event in this series, that you will spread the word that this is a worthwhile way to spend your time. So, without further ado, I hope that you enjoyed the film, and we'll see you afterwards for a panel. panel discussion and a Q&A. Thank you.
As Tim said, thank you for that. Thank you, Tim, for doing all the great work to make this happen. We are all partners, but Tim was the driving force. We were so lucky to have Kim Snyder here, the filmmaker, who will tell us what it was like to make the film, but also field questions from you all about what you're experiencing in your communities. And to help in that, we have Lorna Johnson, who is a really exciting leader who has done work. She has her own consulting firm, but was the founder of United Way in Uganda and Ghana. And works with 22 people from 22 different African countries, and has been very active and is currently very active with the African Community Engagement Initiative. Did I get that right? Yes. Here in Newark and surrounding areas. So having Lorna here is really very exciting for us. We also are lucky to have Anjana, or Angie Malhotra, who is the practitioner in residence at the Center for Social Justice at Seton Hall School of Law for just a little more time. She's leaving us for the faculty of the Seattle University Law School in August, which is very sad for all of us, so you'll want to hear from her and talk to her before she goes. But she's done incredibly important work, especially, well, she'll tell us more, but a lot around low-wage workers and detainee issues, and looking at the intersection of local and federal law in the lives of immigrants in our midst. And just to say that there are a couple of other people in the audience who do related work and may be able to speak to particular issues that will come up along the way. And they include Robert Montemayor, who runs the Latino Information Network at Rutgers-New Brunswick, which is an exciting project he can tell you about. He's in the front. And Amy Gottlieb is somewhere in the back with Jaja. Jaja, I don't know your last name, but I know you do really good work. And they are with the American Friends Service Committee, and they are also offering legal services all the time to people who are in desperate need of them, immigrants who are in desperate need of them. And also Kathy Tansey, who's with the International Institute, whose work is specifically focused on immigrants and refugees, who's here somewhere. So without further ado, let's, I know that Kim, this is, I think, the first time that you're seeing this cut of the film with an audience. And so I wondered if you could just react for us to what that feels like. I guess, you know, you've moved on to other projects now, and the immigration landscape has changed somewhat. So can you just tell us what this felt like, and I guess where the work has gone since?
Yes. Okay, great. This works. Well, it's great to be here in Newark. I live in Manhattan, so it's nice to have a screening that's been sort of all over the place. And this cut that you've seen is actually the cut that will be airing on PBS's Independent Lens on May 24th. So it's just really, we've been waiting sort of a year for this broadcast date, and it's exciting to not only think about that, but I think the program that they do, this community cinema, is really all about this. It's about partners like this being able to get together, and this is what's happening here is going to be happening in about 60 to 80 cities starting really today across the country, in small places like Shelbyville, and opportunities for people to organize in whatever way and bring together people on the ground who are interested in this issue. So that's thrilling to see that happening right here in Newark. And I'll also just say that the film, along with a lot of other things we've been doing domestically, part of which you saw on the screen, there's a robust campaign and an online initiative. I've been able to do a lot of working with the State Department. The film was part of a program called American Documentary Showcase, and something that struck a chord when I started about your background is that actually the first place this film ever screened was in Nigeria, where they assigned me as a sort of cultural ambassador to go. And the idea of the program is to bring portraits of America that might not be seen in places around the globe. So the first audience I screened with was in Kano in northern Nigeria, which is largely Muslim, and it was just phenomenal to see how much the story resonated. I knew it would resonate in places in Kansas and elsewhere, but to see young Nigerian people responding to this with, we have lessons to learn from Shelbyville, and this is what's happening right nearby here, and was really great. So it's really having a very global, I think that since the making of the film, sort of the issues of Islamophobia are certainly one of the conversations of our times, and those are all the things that I'm thinking about as I watched.
That's great. Fantastic film. It captures so much what goes on, and I want to thank Tim and Stacy and the Rutgers Institute for putting this together, because I think that it has a potential to have a very strong impact in New Jersey, given the diversity of, let's see, we're about 20% immigrant. I think like 1 in 3 children have an immigrant parent, and racially we're very diverse, and there's similar tensions and movements that could really benefit from this film. I do work with a lot of day laborers and immigrant workers in the community, and it's interesting. One thing I found really interesting and similar is that so many of the sites have changed. I mean, AFSC is at the forefront of change that Amy Gottlieb leads with the attorneys there, but locally a lot of the change takes place in churches and ESL classes. That's where immigrant communities come together and really start kind of engaging, becoming empowered, and building movements. And this movie really presented an excellent model of how communities can mobilize around something very concrete and also come together. I think I've never worked with churches more than I have in New Jersey, and even though we are north of the Mason-Dixon line, there are a lot of tensions. I mean, it's not so different. I was wondering about the tension, if there was a tension. You had some church groups that kind of were focused on conversion, and then others which were really focused on interfaith collaboration and unity. So I guess I just wanted to ask you about that tension and how that played out in Shelbyville.
Yeah, I think I certainly learned a lot about that. Obviously, when you make a film, we had over 100 hours of footage that you have to cull into the 54 minutes that you just saw. But being in Shelbyville, I mean, it is a very faith-based community, but I think representative of a lot of places in America. And a lot of the footage that you weren't able to see was discussion with people like Stephen Kane, who was the Presbyterian minister, around, we have a lot of tension. He's saying to me, we have a lot of interdenominational issues and differences, and if we can't even get together over that, how can we possibly think about a sort of bigger leap? So I think it is something that some of the more progressive ministers, and that's why I think we're doing a lot of work with it in interfaith settings, which I think is really important, because I think that's where a lot of really important dialogue is going to take place.
And how did the Somali community react to the efforts of the conversion aspect of it? It didn't seem to be a component of every church movements and groups' effort to kind of
honestly, at the time of the filming, I'm not sure they were aware of it too much. I mean, that's something I was privy to behind closed doors. They hadn't really started knocking on doors. Or they were, that was not tongue-in-cheek, they were planning this barbecue, which I'm not sure took place, but I mean, the Somalis' understanding and attitude was sort of like, we have our beliefs and you have yours, and that's cool, and we'll work this out.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure there was a real, there certainly wasn't any paranoia.
Well, it was nice to see that the way it ended and that there was that interfaith meeting with the two religious leaders, and I thought that was very powerful as well. That shows it kind of like rising above.
There is a scene that I couldn't include where they do go inside, and it is actually a great conversation between the two of them, and Stephen Kane says, "I want you to understand, we're not trying to convert you, at least my church." It feels like there's a little bit the seeds of trust being built there.
Great.
That's really the essence of the tension. We want to embrace you, whether you come from a Judeo-Christian or Islamic, to love other people. But at the end of the day, we have to struggle with our own value system that we want to embrace you, but we want to embrace you in the context that we feel comfortable. And I think that context, whether it's in the Deep South, so to speak, or in the Up South in New Jersey, is what we all have to struggle with. I had the fortune to sit at the Eagleton Institute, and even though I love being there, this was a totally different experience seeing the film in an auditorium. And we probably don't have enough time, but there were so many issues of how people can do change. The women were the ones who made the effort. Tim has a very component that I agree, food is used as a way of breaking bonds, using the church. So all of these components, if you just kind of take it in a theoretical, are what we can use even in New Jersey. I found it very interesting that the young woman, or the African American woman, had very traditional issues, which says that once you come and believe that you are assimilated, even if you were part of the oppressed, you hold some traditional values, and that should be assumed. So I think the issues of Shelbyville really, when we start seeing changes in our own selves, really come to us examining what we want to accept and what we need to work through. In Essex County, we're working on a project working with the African immigrant community. There aren't that many Somalians here. There are some East Africans, but mostly West Africans and a few Kenyans. And even though on a certain day we all may look alike, there are some very different cultural values and changes between the African immigrant community that chose to be here and those of us who came here under force or different circumstances. And I think that happens in other places. So I think the film really requires all of us to kind of look deep inside. Many of us may work with different people of immigrant. We may have our International Food Day, where everybody's asked to bring something. But at the end of the day, are we looking to really engage with people? Are we looking to say, oh, there they are. Why don't they speak English? Why won't they speak English? So I think your film, Kim, which, this time I was in the front. I mean, I felt very emotionally connected to it, not just because of the work, but because how you portrayed it. And just one final thing, because I do work extensively in Africa and have been working since '93, I really did not become engaged with the immigrant community until I went to Liberia. And even though I had been working in Ghana and South Africa and other places, and this is before Johnson Sirleaf became president, and if anything you know about a post-conflict country, you will understand the words that the Mexican said, all I want to do is work. All he wanted to do was survive. And having the experience of being in Liberia, where I saw people walking in total desolation and wanting to have some sense of their awareness, but didn't have that chance, you kind of become a little bit more empathetic. We take advantage of what we have here, those of us who were born here. So I think having a certain global sensibility, and I always encourage people to travel, can sometimes also make people a little bit aware. I'm very interested in talking after about the Kano, experience too. So I think what these type of community forums that have us talk about these issues, many of us are in different professions, social work, law, just need to kind of just break that down. But I think there's nothing wrong also with maintaining our own culture. As long as, and I think that's what needs to be said. You know, I mentioned, well, I want to have potato salad. I want to eat potato salad. You know, I may not want to eat couscous that day. And it doesn't make me bad, it's just making me that I want to reaffirm my culture. So we need to find ways to reaffirm our culture, but also ways to embrace those others, so to speak, who are coming in to give us a new, what I hope can be a new beautiful culture in the 21st century.
Film was to capture a year in the life of one of these towns. It wasn't, the scope wasn't to, you know, you can't really take on like all aspects of immigration. But I'm glad you asked, because what we tried to do is early on, we went to immigration policy makers and said, what stories are you seeing out there? And, you know, what hasn't been told? And they said, we've seen a lot of stories about hate crimes, we've seen, you know, a whole number of things, but we haven't really seen what it's looking like in a small rural place. I was interested in seeing, for people who don't have a lot of exposure to the outside world, how that was playing out, how people were navigating these waters. The particular people who arrived in Shelbyville are, you know, maybe you can speak more to it, but they are people looking for work, and there's only one or two industries there. So I guess in a sense it is a rung in the labor market. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that how it is uneducated. You know, how I think you remember at one point says that she had been a nurse. But I hear what you're saying, and probably there are some good films out there that are, you know, based in urban areas and elsewhere that.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, I think that the fear that was being expressed is a common fear, and that was being grappled with, that's directed towards immigrants, educated or not educated. I'm thinking about the editorial last year in Newsweek, where an editor went back to Edison and described how you know, he was a white man who grew up in Edison, and he described how he finally related to Arizona and the law that was passed there because it was filled with filthy Indians. Now, that's not, you know, educated or not, you know, there's a mix of working class and educated folks in Edison. But that kind of fear, I think, is common whether someone is, you know, comes in with a professional background or not. And many folks who come in with a professional background end up in working class jobs too. But I think that it hits on just that wall that immigrants face throughout the country and how to grapple with that wall of difference of fear and discomfort.
And also the great thing about these kinds of events is people can contextualize it. I was just in Cleveland where the film screened at a festival, and a lot of the focus of this particular panel that was there was people doing work around empirical data on entrepreneurial economic growth in places in the Rust Belt, and how important, how many patents were being generated. I mean, they were giving some real hardcore stats on exactly what you say on the importance of immigrants in building the economy. So I think people can contextualize and use it in these different ways in their work.
I'll just interject here to say that it's a really important question that you asked, and I know you guys are saying the same, but part of what we want to do is sort of look at what this film brings out about New Jersey, or makes us think about New Jersey. And it's true that compared to most other states, New Jersey has a very large segment of highly educated immigrants. So New Jersey, after California and New York, New Jersey is third in the nation in the number of H-1B visas that are granted to workers who come here. And so this is for highly educated workers, mainly who have graduate level training in the sciences and technology. And there is a whole segment of the New Jersey economy that basically runs on immigrant labor, and these are, you know, high wage earners, high taxpayers who are making the state attractive to large corporations that come here and hire people all along the economic ladder. So that's certainly one of the immigrant New Jersey stories. More than half of the PhDs in the state are foreign-born, and the employers the top 10 H-1B employers include the pharmaceutical companies you've all heard of, the hospitals, the universities that employ some of us. So, you know, that the immigrants make the New Jersey economy run, whether they have no education or limited or are as educated as a person can possibly get.
Just to add to that, I was at a conference recently where we were talking about H-1B workers and how they're tied to their employers, and there's been more employer abuse of H-1B workers, like they're getting paid half as much, they're forced to work longer hours because their H-1B visas are kind of like hung in front of them. And it occurred to me that, you know, this is what H-1A workers, farm workers have been, you know, they're tied to their employers, they can't leave. It was the exact same kind of dynamic that H-1A workers have been facing for so long. And so there's a lot of interesting ties, although there are some important differences too that education makes as well.
Thank you.
Filming, there was a survey I was privy to that had like a range of attitudes of people in Shelbyville towards immigrants that a local group had done, and one of the top kind of attitudes that really stood out for me was this major disconnect, as you point out, between what immigrants of the past looked like and immigrants of today. Kind of like, well, my grandparents weren't they have nothing to do with these people today. And so for me, when you see the scene of Miguel and his wife stand up during inauguration in their living room, that for me emotionally, you know, just completely spontaneously responding to the voice on television and showing this patriotism was a moment for me where I somehow completely connected with my immigrant grandfather, and I think that's was a real goal of the film and a real problem, is this complete disconnect. And I think a lot of the disconnect is happening because of a lot of oversimplification of the whole immigration policy issue and the whole tendency to be framing everything into documented and undocumented, legal, but I think that's one of the big problems, is people just, you know, have this disconnect of where a country came from. Much confrontation. There was, for me, a lot of lack of self-consciousness and not so much worrying about political correctness, which I found refreshing. So it's like at the end when you hear Marilyn saying, well, why don't y'all like to hold hands? That's pretty direct. Not necessarily confrontational, but, you know, are my arms okay like this? I mean, that kind of stuff maybe is a form of directness. You know what I mean? I mean, certainly no one vocalized quite particularly what you just did, but I think people, for the most part in that town also, they really genuinely come a lot from a very faith-based place, and so a lot of, you know, a lot of what was genuine was, I want to know more, I want to be more welcoming, or I don't, or they're taking my jobs, or are you going to blow us up? More than the kind of analysis so much, you know, certainly what you're saying isn't stuff that I left out.
Thank you. Stacey, you asked me to briefly address this gentleman's point, so I'll just do it quickly and tell you that this is what I teach, kind of, sort of, you know, in part. I would just make 3 really quick points, because I don't think we want to get off, but come take my class, or come talk in my class. Or, the first I would say is that for as long as we've had immigration, and we've had immigration since the founding of the United States, in fact, you can go back and you can read the words of Jefferson and Hamilton and Franklin duking it out about immigration. You'll notice in the Constitution there's almost nothing about immigration, right? Because this was an incredibly contentious issue. But Hamilton kind of, you know, in some ways he perseveres, and he says, you know, there's a point where Benjamin Franklin says, they're supposed to come here and become American. Instead, they're making us all Germans. You know, there's some kind of, right? So it goes all the way back. And Hamilton kind of says, look, you know, we have to grow economically, and we need to be about, you know, importing labor, right? And there's a whole story about labor importation and how it starts with white indentured servants and why they end up going to chattel slavery of African Americans. And, you know, that's a very complicated story, not so easily summed up as immigration, which I'm sure you would agree. We talked a little bit about this last time I saw you. So point one is they always say that about immigrants. Point two is that, yeah, there are a lot of studies that have been done that look specifically about the impact of immigration on workers who are already here. And essentially, I would say that the vast majority of studies show that the impact is very slight. So I would say that there's kind of a consensus that the impact is much less than people kind of assume. And the interesting thing is that the impact of the lowest wage immigrants tends to be on the immigrants who were just arriving here a little before them. You follow me? So that's the kind of the idea. And then the last point I would make is just that I think that there's, in some ways, we stand in a place where it's really important for us to talk about immigration reform and never not talk about it in the same breath as the levels of black unemployment and underemployment and levels of incarceration, that in some ways we have to talk about these things together, right? We have to talk about a just economy in the United States. We want justice for those who are here and for those who are coming, and we have to stand in that place together.
Right.
I agree that it's never going to be a melting pot, but perhaps the difference between Shelbyville and Brooklyn is that those people really have to go to the same bank. I mean, they have to see each other in ways that people in cities, I don't know if you, but it really feels different because it's so small. It is Mayberry.
That's another problem. I vote that we strike the words them and us from our vocabulary, because as long as we keep thinking about them and about us, there's not going to be any unity. I'd like to invite everybody on behalf of Unidad Latina Nacion, New Jersey, a small Latin grassroots Latino immigrant rights, to come to International Workers' Day this coming Sunday in Hightstown. It's the only place in New Jersey that's going to be celebrating May Day.
As their primary focus. We're really pleased to present. We're not preventing anything here tonight, we hope. To present Welcome to Shelbyville as the inaugural event in a new series that this particular group of collaborators has put together. We'll focus on what we're calling the newest New Jerseyans. We invite you all to join us on May 11th for the second event, which is a forum on the implications of the 2010 census and New Jersey's changing demographic. And the details about this particular event are on your program, and if you need information to register for that, that is also on your program. A couple of quick logistics before we begin. Directly following the screening, there will be a brief panel discussion of the film, followed by an opportunity for you all to ask questions and comment on the film. We'd also be most grateful, and this is where there's no such thing as a free lunch or a free reception comes in. We would be most grateful if you would take a moment before you leave to fill out the questionnaire we have circulated. That's the rather loud orange piece of paper that many of you are holding right now. I hate filling out questionnaires. I feel your pain. I flinch, I get angry, people shouldn't make me right. However, if the collaborations that have brought this particular film here and that have brought this particular film into being are to lead to something more out of your program, you will see 11 logos. Shelbyville, the film, is a co-production of 4 of those logos. A 5th logo is responsible for generating community screenings of the film around the country as catalysts for implementing engagement campaigns and coalition building around the film. The 6th logo, filmmaker Kim Snyder's Because Foundation, drives social change through the fusion of documentary filmmaking and related strategic programs that promote broad-based movements for social change. It's a fabulous foundation, and I urge you to check it out online. Finally, this community screening of Welcome to Shelbyville it's the result of a prodigious collaborative effort between a wide variety of media, cultural, and immigrant organizations. I want to take a moment to identify everyone involved, not merely to acknowledge their contribution to making the screening possible, which I feel I need to do, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to emphasize the potential significance of this as a model for our efforts to generate a better environment for for Immigrant Integration and Civic Participation in New Jersey. If you look at the front side of your program on the bottom, and for those of you who don't have a program, there are plenty over here under the exit sign. But if you take a quick look at the Considerations mark Shelbyville as a film with a purpose, to generate civic dialogue and community building around immigrant integration in the United States. And it's particularly fortuitous that particular partners who are presenting this screening tonight have come together around this film. The Newark Museum is one of the great legacy cultural institutions of the city. The Star-Ledger is the most significant media source in the state. And the programs on immigration and democracy in New Brunswick and the Center for Migration and the local city here in Newark are two Rutgers-based organizations that work on immigration and immigrant integration